Each afternoon, a strange moment occurs in the garden that most people have never truly noticed. Just a few minutes earlier, the cardinals were still pecking at seeds in the feeder. The chickadees were constantly flitting through the branches, and the robins were pulling the last worms from the grass under the fading light of dusk. Then the sun sets, and in just about 20 minutes, everything disappears. The branches that were once full of noise now stand completely still. The garden that had just been overflowing with life suddenly looks like an entirely different place. So where have those birds really gone? Most people think they just fly somewhere around the neighborhood, sleep temporarily on trees, and simply vanish from human sight until the next morning. But the truth is far more precise and strange. The nighttime world of birds is almost completely invisible to us, even though it is happening right outside our windows every night. In the darkness, some bird species intentionally lower their body temperature to dangerous levels to save every bit of energy to survive the cold night, while other species are flying hundreds of kilometers above your head in complete darkness. And now we will step into that secret part of their lives where the garden is not silent at all as humans imagine. What most people don't realize is that every bird species in the garden has its own nighttime roosting strategy. And all of them are optimized for one single goal, surviving until the next morning. Northern cardinals usually don't fly very far after the sun sets. They quietly disappear into dense bushes, thick leaf cover, or ivy patches very close to where they forage during the day. What matters to them is not comfort, but the ability to vanish from the sight of predators. A sleeping bird has almost no chance to defend itself, and in nature, being spotted even once can mean the end. That's why cardinals often return to the same roosting spot for many weeks, even months, if that place is safe enough. Right now, just a few meters from your window, a bird may be sleeping peacefully in a bush you have never noticed. But the survival strategy of chickadees is much stranger. On the coldest winter nights, they intentionally lower their body temperature by dozens of degrees to save energy. This is no longer like normal sleep, but almost a form of controlled system shutdown. Their heart rate drops, metabolism slows down, and the entire body switches to maximum energy-saving mode just to get through a few hours of cold darkness. And what is astonishing is that these birds weigh only a few grams. Such a tiny creature must survive temperatures that could kill many other animals in just a few hours. Without reducing energy consumption, many of them would not have enough reserves to make it to dawn. So they seek out old tree cavities, abandoned woodpecker holes, or small cracks in tree trunks to spend the night. Those windproof dark spaces act like natural insulation chambers, retaining every bit of precious warmth from their tiny bodies. And what makes all of this so amazing is that this entire survival system is quietly taking place right in your seemingly quiet garden. While humans think nature has gone to sleep, dozens of tiny creatures out there are still fighting hour by hour to keep their hearts beating until the next morning. There is something very strange that happens in the nighttime world of birds that most humans have never seen. Many bird species that spend the entire day defending territory, chasing away their own kind, and competing for living space suddenly change completely when temperatures begin to drop after dusk. Eastern bluebirds are an almost perfect example of this. During breeding season, they are extremely aggressive toward other birds that intrude into their territory. They defend their foraging areas, nest boxes, and perching branches with astonishing determination for such a small creature. But when winter comes, all the rules seem to disappear. Instead of chasing each other away, birds that once saw each other as rivals now huddle closely together in the same small nest box just to stay warm through the night. On the coldest nights, more than 10 bluebirds have been recorded squeezing their buddies tightly into a tiny wooden cavity with almost no space left. What is astonishing is that they hardly have any conflicts. During the day, distance means territory. At night, distance can mean death. When temperatures drop too low, staying warm becomes more important than any other competitive instinct. Simply by sharing body heat with each other, each bird can significantly reduce the amount of energy it must burn to maintain its body temperature until morning. And for a tiny creature weighing only a few dozen grams, that difference can determine life or death. This means that in winter, temporary cooperation becomes a more effective survival strategy than competition. Nature doesn't care about pride or territory. Nature only cares about which creatures are capable of surviving the long, cold night. Carolina wrens show something similar. This is a species that usually lives quite solitarily and is extremely active during the day. But when temperatures drop, many of them will squeeze into the same small tree cavity to reduce heat loss to the environment. Inside those dark, cramped spaces, each tiny body acts as a biological heat source, helping the whole group survive. What is strange is that all of this is happening right in people's backyards every night, and almost no one notices. A nest box hanging on a tree that looks completely normal during the day may be filled with creatures huddling tightly together in the darkness to fight the cold. A dense bush in the corner of the yard may be becoming a life or death shelter for an entire group of small birds. Humans often think of those things as just decorations for birds or harmless parts of the garden, but for the birds, they are real survival infrastructure. In many cases, simply lacking one windproof shelter can mean a small bird won't survive until dawn. What makes all of this so amazing is that everything happens in almost complete silence. When humans look out at the garden at night, they only see darkness and motionless branches. But behind that stillness are dozens of creatures depending on each other to keep their bodies from losing heat too quickly. There are tiny hearts beating close together in dark tree cavities. There are bodies shivering to generate heat in the freezing air. There are creatures surviving only because they are willing to lie close to their own kind instead of fighting each other like during the day. And that is probably the strangest thing about the natural world. The smaller and more fragile the creatures, the more sophisticated their survival strategies often are. Behind the gentle appearance of the birds in backyard gardens are millions of years of evolution that have refined every small behavior to maximize survival chances. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at a nest box or a bush in the yard the same way again, because now you know that when night falls, those seemingly meaningless places are actually becoming life and death bunkers for tiny creatures quietly fighting to live through one more night. When we sleep, consciousness almost completely disappears for many hours. The brain gradually shuts down attention to the surrounding world to restore energy. But for a tiny creature living in an environment where every strange sound can mean death, completely losing vigilance is something that can hardly exist long-term in the evolutionary process. Therefore, many bird species have developed an almost unbelievable ability. They can sleep with half their brain while the other half remains awake to continue monitoring the surrounding environment. This means one brain hemisphere rests while the other maintains just enough alertness to detect danger. After a period of time, the two sides switch roles. One part of the brain sleeps, the other stands guard. Then they alternate continuously throughout the long night. That is why many bird species can sleep with one eye still open. If you look closely at a bird resting on a branch at dusk, sometimes you will see one of its eyes closed, while the other remains observing the darkness around it. That is not random. A bird's brain is cross-connected with its eyes, so the open eye corresponds to the awake brain hemisphere. This means that even while resting, part of the bird is still monitoring the world. Studies on mallard ducks show this clearly to an astonishing degree. The ducks at the edge of the flock usually keep the eye facing outward open while sleeping, while the eye facing inward toward the flock truly rests. They take turns becoming the living sentry system for the whole group. This means that a flock of birds sleeping at night is not a collection of motionless, unconscious creatures, but more like a distributed monitoring network. Some are resting more deeply. Some are listening. Some are watching darkness outside the bushes. The entire system operates almost automatically without any command. And what is astonishing is that it is so effective that many bird species can detect danger almost immediately from very small changes in the surrounding environment. The faint sound of a branch snapping in the night, a very soft scratching on tree bark, an unusual wing beat in the darkness. To humans, those sounds are almost meaningless, but to birds, they could be signs of a hunting cat, a climbing stick, or an approaching owl. In an instant, the entire garden can switch from a state of silence to complete alertness. A single alarm call from one bird can spread throughout the area like a biological alert signal. The other birds immediately wake up. The tiny bodies that were huddled in the bushes suddenly tense up. Dozens of pairs of eyes open in the darkness that humans don't notice at all. That is why the nighttime garden has never truly been empty. It is only silent by human perception standards. In reality, behind that night curtain is an entire perceptual system operating continuously. There are birds sleeping with one eye open on the branches. There are tiny bodies reacting to the slightest vibrations in the air. There are invisible warning signals transmitting through the garden faster than humans can imagine. And what makes all of this even stranger is that most of it happens right outside our windows every night. When humans look out at the dark yard and think nature has fallen asleep, in reality, dozens of the tiny creatures out there are still experiencing a world full of vigilance, sounds, and continuous survival responses. Imagine a garden at midnight from the birds' perspective instead of humans. The dark bushes are no longer empty spaces, but places hiding bodies, listening to every movement. The branches are no longer standing still, but have become observation posts in the darkness. Above, owls are gliding by almost silently. Below, a cat is stepping slowly across the grass. Farther away, a bird has just given a short alarm call that wakes dozens of other creatures at the same time. The entire garden operates like a giant biological nervous system that humans have almost never seen. And perhaps the most amazing thing is that this entire system still exists around us every night, quietly, precisely, and far more alive than the calm appearance our eyes perceive. Perhaps the most astonishing thing about the nighttime world of birds is that most people have no idea that the sky above their house every night is actually filled with enormous flocks of migrating birds. When humans draw the curtains, turn off the lights, and think nature has fallen silent, above their heads, one of the largest biological movements on the planet may be taking place. In spring and fall, millions of birds can fly over the same area in just a single night. And what is strange is that these are not alien creatures from another world. They are the very birds that appeared in your backyard all summer. The small birds you see perching on the fence, flitting through bushes, or singing every morning outside your window are actually continent-crossing travelers far more amazing than their tiny appearance suggests. Wood thrushes are an almost unbelievable example. During the day, they look like ordinary brown birds hopping under the trees looking for insects. But when night falls during migration season, they take off and begin journeys thousands of kilometers long through complete darkness. They fly above forests, cities, mountains, and oceans, while most humans below have no idea what is happening. What is even more astonishing is that many other small bird species are also making nearly unimaginable trips. The ruby-throated hummingbird, a creature weighing only a few grams, with a heart beating thousands of times per minute, can fly continuously across the entire Gulf of Mexico in a non-stop journey hundreds of kilometers long. Try imagining that for a few seconds. A body so small it fits in the palm of your hand is speeding across the dark ocean all night with no place to stop, no lights, no path, no map, only sky, wind, and darkness. And somehow they still reach exactly where they need to go. That is the part that still amazes scientists to this day. These birds are navigating using signals that humans do not fully understand. They use the positions of stars, the direction of sunset, the Earth's magnetic field, and possibly biological mechanisms that modern science has only begun to discover. There is evidence that birds can truly sense the planet's magnetic field like an invisible map spread across the sky. This means that while humans look up at the night and see only darkness, birds may be seeing an enormous guidance system that our senses cannot perceive at all. And all of this was almost invisible to humans until weather radar technology began to reveal the truth. One of the most amazing tracking systems today is the Bird Migration Monitoring Program at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Initially, weather radars were designed to track rain and storms, but then scientists realized that every night during migration season, the radar screens showed enormous moving masses that were neither clouds nor rain. It was birds, millions, sometimes billions of living creatures moving at the same time across the skies of North America. On some nights, the radar system recorded biological storms, so large they almost filled the screen. Those migration streams stretch hundreds of kilometers, moving through the darkness like invisible rivers in the sky. What is astonishing is that all of these phenomena are still happening every year, right above people's heads, and most of us don't realize it at all. A family can be sleeping peacefully in their house while hundreds of thousands of birds are flying across the sky above their roof, just a few hundred meters away, and no one hears anything, no one sees anything, because most of nature's life happens beyond the limits of human perception. That is also what makes the nighttime garden so strange. When the birds disappear from the branches after dusk, they have not disappeared from the world. They have simply entered the part of life that humans rarely witness. Some are huddling in dark bushes to stay warm until morning. Some are sleeping with one eye open to monitor the darkness around them. Others are pressing close to their own kind in small tree cavities to survive the cold night. And above all of that, millions of birds are flying across the night sky along ancient routes that existed long before humans built the first cities. The strangest thing is perhaps not that birds can do these things, but that this entire enormous biological system has always existed around us, while most humans have never truly seen it. A small garden behind an ordinary-looking house is actually directly connected to continent-crossing journeys, planetary-scale migration networks, and survival mechanisms refined over millions of years of evolution. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at nighttime silence the same way again, because now you know that when night falls and the branches become still, nature has not stopped working. It has simply shifted to its most secret part. But the nighttime world of birds is not just a story about sleep, migration, or sophisticated heat-saving strategies. It is also a story about predators waking up at the same time as the bird species begin to disappear into the darkness. The moment the garden becomes quiet is also the moment an invisible hunt begins. While the small birds are finding shelter among the bushes and dark tree cavities, other pairs of eyes are opening in the night to search for them. One of the most fearsome predators of the nighttime garden is the great horned owl. Most people rarely see them, not because they are rare, but because they are almost perfect in the darkness. An owl can appear above the garden almost completely silently. No wing beats, no wind whistling, no warning signs of its presence. That is why many bird species never know the owl is coming until the final moment. What makes owls so terrifying lies in the very structure of their bodies. The leading edge of an owl's wing feathers has tiny serrations that break up airflow and eliminate most sound during flight. The special soft feather layer continues to absorb the remaining vibrations, making their movement almost completely disappear from the world of sound. For many nocturnal creatures, sound is the most important warning system, but owls have evolved to pass through that very system undetected. This means that a quiet garden at midnight is actually filled with survival tension that human eyes never notice. A bird sleeping in a bush is not just trying to stay warm or save energy. It is trying to avoid becoming the next meal. Just one owl call ringing out in the night is enough to make dozens of sleeping birds instantly switch to extreme alertness. The tiny bodies huddled in the darkness suddenly tense up. The half-closed eyes open all at once. The whole garden seems to wake up in a few seconds and then sinks back into silence, like water just disturbed by an invisible stone. But owls are not the only danger. For many bird species that sleep near the ground or in low bushes, domestic cats are truly the most dangerous predators. What is strange is that most house cats still retain the hunting instincts formed from their wild ancestors millions of years ago. A cat moving through the garden at night is almost a perfect nightmare for small birds. They step extremely lightly, patiently, and almost invisibly in the darkness. And because sleeping birds react more slowly than during the day, simply choosing the wrong roosting spot can mean the end. That is why many bird species do not choose the warmest sleeping spot, but the hardest to reach one, a bush full of thorns, a branch too thin for a cat, a deep, dark tree cavity that claws cannot reach. Each small choice like that is the result of millions of years of evolution against predators. The birds that exist today are not random. They are the descendants of countless generations that chose the right branch, the right bush, and the right moment to respond to danger in the darkness. And what makes all of this so amazing is that it is still happening around us every night, while most humans have never noticed. When you look out at the garden at midnight and see everything motionless, in reality, behind that silence is a silent biological battlefield. There is an owl watching from a high branch in the darkness. There is a cat moving close to the grass. There are birds sleeping with faster heartbeats just because they heard a small, unusual sound. There are tiny bodies trying to stay perfectly still to avoid detection. The entire garden operates like a tense survival network where every creature is both a hunter and prey for something else. And perhaps that is what makes nighttime nature so strange. Humans often think darkness is the time when the world stops working. But for many creatures, darkness is when life becomes the most intense. Hunts begin. Chases take place in absolute silence. Tiny creatures huddle waiting for dawn, while other pairs of eyes search for them in the darkness. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at a nighttime garden the same way again. Because now you know that darkness does not only hide birds, it also hides all the dangers quietly moving around them throughout the long night. Not all bird species have the ability to sleep deeply for hours as we usually imagine. For many migratory birds, stopping to rest for too long can actually be more dangerous than continuing to fly. Some must cross oceans thousands of kilometers wide. Some must keep up with the flock during multi-day migrations. And others simply have nowhere safe to land during the journey. So nature has created an almost unimaginable solution. There are bird species that can sleep while flying. One of the most astonishing examples is the frigate bird. This is a seabird with large wingspans that spends most of its life above the ocean. They can maintain continuous flight for many weeks, sometimes longer, with almost no need to land on the water. This sounds almost impossible to the human brain because we always think sleep means complete immobility. But frigate birds do not sleep that way. Instead, they only allow small parts of their brain to rest for a few seconds or minutes, while the rest continues to maintain navigation ability and flight control. What is astonishing is that sometimes they even sleep with half their brain, just like many birds sleeping on branches. Except the entire process is happening in midair above the dark ocean. Try imagining that for a few seconds. A creature hovering in the sky with thousands of kilometers of seawater below, darkness and cold wind above. But its brain can still alternate resting small parts without letting the body fall from the sky. This is probably one of the strangest and most amazing biological adaptations in the entire animal world. For migratory birds, time is extremely important. A rest that is too long can cause them to fall behind the flock, miss favorable winds, or expend energy they cannot replenish in time. For many small bird species, that can mean starving before reaching the next wintering or breeding grounds. Therefore, the ability to rest in parts while flying is not just a biological oddity. It is a real survival strategy. And what makes all of this almost surreal is that it is happening above our heads every night. When humans fall asleep in their quiet rooms, there are millions of birds out there crossing the sky in a half-awake, half-asleep state. Their wings continue beating steadily in the darkness. Their tiny brains continuously switch between rest and alertness. Part of that creature is sleeping, while the other part continues navigating through the night, using invisible signals from the stars and the Earth's magnetic field. This shows that what humans call sleep in birds is actually far more flexible than ordinary intuition. For us, Sleep is usually a state almost detached from the surrounding world. But for birds, especially migratory ones, sleep can be just extremely short rests, inserted into survival journeys thousands of kilometers long. And perhaps that is what makes the night sky so strange. Humans look up and see only quiet darkness, but above that space there may exist countless creatures flying and sleeping, resting and surviving in the same moment. A flock of birds can be crossing an entire continent while each individual inside it continuously switches states of consciousness to avoid falling from the sky. That almost sounds like science fiction rather than real nature, but it is happening every year, every migration season, and perhaps right tonight above your house. The deeper we understand birds, the more humans are forced to accept that nature often solves survival problems in ways far beyond our imagination. If a tiny creature can sleep and fly across an ocean in complete darkness, then perhaps reality out there is far more complex than the way the human brain evolved to live on the ground, once a thought. When we look out the window at midnight and see only motionless branches under the darkness, the brain immediately concludes that the outside world has sunk into complete rest. But that silence mostly exists only because human senses are too limited to recognize what is really happening. For birds, the nighttime garden is not an empty space. It is an environment full of signals, movement, and survival information continuously exchanged in the darkness. Most of those sounds are too small or too subtle for humans to notice. A short call, almost inaudible, coming from a bush, an extremely light wing beat on a high branch, a small rustling of leaves when a creature moves through. To us, that is just the vague background noise of the night. But to birds, every sound carries meaning. Many bird species use very short calls to confirm each other's positions in complete darkness. They do not sing long like during the day, but only emit tiny signals enough for their own kind to know they are still there and still safe. This is especially important for species that sleep in groups or roost close together in dense bushes. Simply losing contact with the flock in the darkness can increase the risk of predation. And because so many bird species live in a state of continuous alertness throughout the night, even the smallest unusual change can spread through the area almost instantly. A strange sound rings out in the corner of the garden. A leaf rustles out of rhythm with the wind. A very soft scratching on tree bark. In a few seconds, dozens of creatures can simultaneously switch to alert status. Sleeping birds open their eyes. Tiny bodies tense up in the darkness. A short warning signal rings out and spreads through the bushes like an invisible wave. What is strange is that the entire system operates almost completely based on sound and vibration that humans almost never notice. For birds, night is not the absence of information. It is simply a different kind of environment where sound becomes more important than light. A claw scratching on a tree trunk can reveal a predator's position. An unusually strong wing beat can signal panic. A sudden silence can sometimes be even scarier than noise. Even the direction sound echoes between tree trunks carries information about distance and movement around them. And what makes this even more amazing is that many bird species have hearing far more sensitive than humans in complete darkness. Their brains are optimized to detect the smallest signals in the darkness, where reacting a few seconds too slow can mean death. Try imagining the garden at midnight from the bird's perspective instead of humans. You no longer see a quiet yard. You are standing in the middle of an invisible biological sensor network, spread across every branch and bush. There are pairs of eyes open in the darkness. There are pairs of ears continuously listening to the smallest vibrations in the air. There are tiny bodies reacting to changes in air pressure, sound, and movement around them in an almost instantaneous way. An owl just glided over the garden. A bird on the outermost branch heard the wind change very slightly and immediately sent a warning signal. In just a few seconds, the entire area switched from resting to alert without any loud sounds. For humans sleeping in the room behind the glass, nothing happened. But out there, an entire biological system just reacted like a giant living body. That is what makes the nighttime garden almost surreal once you begin to understand how it really works. Humans often think nature operates mainly during the day, because that is when our eyes see most clearly. But for many creatures, especially birds, night is not when the world stops. It is only when the rules of perception change completely. Light disappears, but information does not. It simply shifts to forms that the human brain pays much less attention to. Perhaps right now, outside the dark garden behind your house, dozens of tiny sound exchanges are taking place that you have never heard. Perhaps the creatures out there are continuously monitoring every movement around them, while humans are completely unaware of it. Throughout almost the entire evolutionary history of birds, the night sky was always dark. For tens of millions of years, migratory birds, predators, and resting birds navigated under the light of the moon, the stars, and nearly perfectly stable natural signals. But then in just a few extremely short centuries, humans completely changed that sky faster than almost any biological change birds have ever faced. Artificial light appeared everywhere. Streetlights, high-rise windows, billboards, stadiums, and cities glowing all night have turned the natural night into something completely different. What is strange is that for humans, light symbolizes safety and civilization, but for many bird species, it is gradually becoming a survival nightmare. A bird's brain is strongly controlled by the natural light cycle. Day and night length determines sleep time, feeding time, breeding time, and even the start of migration. When artificial light appears everywhere, that ancient biological system begins to be disrupted. In many big cities, robins have started singing from 1 or 2 in the morning simply because their brains think dawn is approaching. For humans, birds singing in the middle of the night may sound beautiful or strange, but for the birds, it is a sign that their biological clocks are being broken. A creature evolved to operate on natural light cycles now has to live in an environment where night is no longer truly dark. And the consequences are much greater than just sleeping at the wrong time. For migratory birds, artificial light can completely disorient them. Many bird species navigate using the positions of stars. For millions of years, the night sky functioned as a stable map spread above the planet. But when cities began to glow, that light obscured the ancient astronomical signals that birds rely on to find their way. What happens next is almost like a modern biological tragedy. Flocks of birds migrating at night see the light from tall buildings and begin to be drawn toward it. In fog or low clouds, the reflected light makes the situation even worse. Birds start flying in circles around the buildings in a state of complete disorientation. They continue circling for hours until exhausted. Some collide with glass. Some fall because they run out of energy. Some die immediately without ever understanding what is happening. Every year, millions of migratory birds die from colliding with lighted buildings at night. What is sad is that for humans, those buildings are completely normal. They are just offices, hotels, or apartments with light coming from the windows. But for birds, they are like giant traps appearing in the middle of migration routes that have existed for thousands of generations. Try imagining a small flock of birds flying through the night, using a navigation system evolved over millions of years. Below them is a city glowing so brightly it makes the stars disappear. The familiar signals of the sky suddenly vanish from their brains. Then in front of them appears a giant block of light reflected in the night clouds. They begin to veer off course. A few panic and suddenly change direction. A few others continue flying toward the light. In just a few minutes, the whole flock can fall into complete chaos. What makes all of this strange is that the cause is a technology that humans consider harmless. A light bulb outside a window, a building with lights on all night, a billboard shining in the city. Things too ordinary for us can become survival disasters for other creatures. And the more we understand that, the more humans realize that the natural night sky birds evolved with is gradually disappearing. For most of the history of life, nights on Earth have never been as bright as they are now. Ancient migration routes formed under starlight now have to pass through a network of artificial light covering the planet. Creatures that once navigated by the galaxy now have to fly between cities glowing like artificial suns. And the saddest thing is that most of this happens so quietly that most humans never realize it. When we see city lights twinkling at night, we often think of beauty, technology, and modernity. But somewhere above those lights, there may exist tiny creatures lost in the sky that their ancestors once crossed easily for millions of years. Perhaps right tonight, a flock of birds is circling a lighted building in a state of exhaustion without finding the true direction of the sky again. What makes the world of birds even more unbelievable is that many tiny creatures out there are undertaking journeys that far exceed almost everything humans usually imagine about the capabilities of such a small living body. When looking at a small bird perching on a fence or flitting through the bushes in the backyard, it is hard to believe that creature could be one of the most enduring travelers on the planet. But that is exactly the reality. One of the most astonishing examples is the Arctic tern. Every year, they make the journey from the Arctic all the way to the Antarctic and then back again. This means a creature weighing only a few hundred grams is flying from one end of the planet to the other and repeating that journey throughout its life. Their total annual migration distance can reach tens of thousands of kilometers. And if you add up the entire distance a bird like that flies in its lifetime, many scientists believe it is enough to go to the moon and back multiple times. Try pausing for a few seconds to imagine that. A tiny body much lighter than many books is covering a distance that humans have only achieved with modern space technology. What is even more astonishing is that most of that journey takes place above the vast, endless ocean, where there is almost no place to rest. Many bird species must fly continuously for thousands of kilometers over the sea without being able to land on the water. For them, stopping in the middle of the ocean can mean death. Therefore, the bodies of migratory birds have been turned into biological machines optimized for nearly endless long journeys. Before starting migration, many species will eat continuously for days to build up a thick layer of fat that acts as biological fuel. Their hearts beat at extremely high speeds. Their lungs function with astonishing efficiency. Their breast muscles are optimized for nonstop extended movement. And then when conditions are right, they take off into the darkness. Most major bird migrations occur at night. Cooler air helps the body avoid overheating. The dark sky helps avoid many daytime predators. Night winds are often more stable. But the strangest thing is that even while flying in complete darkness, birds still find the right path in an almost surreal way. They use the positions of the stars, the Earth's magnetic field, the direction of sunset, rivers, coastlines, and even the shapes of mountains to navigate. This means that while humans look up at the night sky and see only distant bright points, birds are reading an enormous map system spread across the planet. What still amazes scientists today is that many young birds on their first migration can still find the right way, even though they have never made that journey before. No one teaches them the route. No one shows them the direction. But somehow their tiny brains seem to carry a built-in form of invisible map encoded deep within their nervous system. A bird born in summer can, just a few months later, fly thousands of kilometers on its own to the exact wintering area that its ancestors have reached for thousands of generations. This is almost unbelievable from a human perspective, because we are used to thinking that complex journeys require maps, technology, and learning. But nature has solved that problem in a completely different way. Instead of giving birds human-like consciousness, evolution has built into their bodies sensory systems that are almost beyond our intuition. And all of this is happening every spring and fall above our heads. The sky that humans think is empty is actually a giant biological highway where millions of creatures are moving across continents at the same time. There are streams of birds flying above cities in the darkness that no one notices. There are tiny bodies crossing seas, mountains, and even storms, thanks only to invisible signals that the human brain cannot perceive. A family can be sleeping peacefully in their house while hundreds of thousands of birds are flying above their roof, along ancient routes that existed long before humans built the first civilization. And perhaps the most wonderful thing is that most of those astonishing travelers are actually the small birds that appear in our backyards every day. The bird perching on the branch outside the window may have just crossed half a continent. The small bird pecking at seeds in the yard may carry within its body a navigation system more sophisticated than anything humans have created for most of their history. The deeper we understand birds, the more humans are forced to acknowledge that nature often hides the most extraordinary things inside the most ordinary-looking creatures. After realizing that, it becomes hard to look at a small bird in the garden the same way again, because now you know that behind that fragile body is a traveler evolved to cross the entire planet using starlight, night winds, and invisible maps that nature wrote deep into its brain millions of years ago. When looking at a small bird perching lightly on a branch or hopping across the grass, humans often have the feeling that they live freely and lightly. But their biological reality is much harsher. Many small bird species exist with an extremely thin energy budget, where just a few hours colder than normal can be enough to end their lives. A winter night that lasts a little longer, a cold wind arriving earlier than expected, a day of foraging that is not efficient enough. Sometimes that alone is enough to make a bird not wake up the next morning. This happens because the tiny bodies of birds lose heat extremely quickly. Creatures weighing only a few grams must maintain a very high body temperature in an environment that is often much colder than they are. It is a cruel physics problem. The smaller the body, the faster it loses heat. That means birds must continuously convert energy into heat just to keep their organs functioning. Therefore, most of their daytime life actually revolves around one single task: finding enough food to survive the next night. A small bird may have to eat continuously from morning to afternoon just to accumulate enough calories needed for a few hours of cold darkness. Imagine a body that has to operate almost all day just to buy the right to exist for the next few hours. That is the real life of many bird species around us. What makes this even more amazing is that many birds wake up every morning in a state of nearly complete energy depletion. After an entire night fighting the cold, the thin layer of fat they accumulated throughout the previous day has almost completely disappeared. That means as soon as the sun rises, they must immediately start searching for food again, not because they want to eat, but because if they delay too long, they may not have enough energy to survive the next night. For small birds, winter is not just cold weather. It is a biological and physical war lasting many months. Just a few extra grams of accumulated fat can sometimes make the difference between life and death. A bird with enough energy to maintain its body temperature for a few more hours can survive a cold snap that another cannot. And because food is often scarcer in cold seasons, every decision during the day becomes extremely important. Birds must continuously balance between foraging and avoiding predators. If they spend too much time on the ground looking for seeds or insects, the risk of being spotted by cats or birds of prey increases. But if they are too cautious and do not eat enough, they may die from heat loss before dawn. That means even the smallest behaviors of birds are the result of an extremely precise survival calculation formed through millions of years of evolution. When a bird flies down to the feeder and immediately raises its head to continuously observe its surroundings, that is not random anxiety. It is trying to survive. When a bird chooses to roost in a dense bush instead of a warmer but more exposed spot, that is a biological decision between temperature and safety. When a flock of birds huddles together on a cold night, that is not cuteness but a life-saving heat retention strategy. What is strange is that all that struggle happens behind the very gentle appearance of birds. Humans see small creatures singing on branches and often think they are fragile. But in reality, many bird species are surviving in conditions that humans could hardly endure without modern technology. A body weighing a few grams can get through a freezing winter night using far less energy than a small light bulb consumes. A creature so small it fits in the palm of a hand can maintain stable body temperature throughout the night amid cold, wind, and frost. And the next morning it continues flying, foraging, and surviving as if nothing happened. Perhaps that is what makes birds so extraordinary. They do not exist because of ease. They exist because of almost astonishing biological efficiency. Every part of their bodies is optimized for energy conservation, heat retention, long-distance flight, and quick response to danger. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at small birds in the backyard as fragile creatures anymore, because now you know that behind those light wings and tiny songs are biological machines evolved to exist at the harshest edges of life every single day. What makes the life of small birds even harsher is that for many species, winter is not really a problem of food. Food is only part of a much larger equation. The real problem is keeping the body warm enough to survive the night. That is the greatest challenge. A tiny creature weighing only a few grams must maintain stable body temperature in an environment that is sometimes dozens of degrees colder than its body. And physics does not side with the birds. The smaller the body, the faster heat escapes. That means birds continuously lose heat into the cold surrounding air, much faster than larger animals. For them, every winter night is like a silent war against nonstop heat loss. That is why birds have developed a series of extremely sophisticated survival strategies just to retain every bit of warmth in their tiny bodies. One of the most noticeable things is how birds fluff up their feathers when it is cold. To humans, that action looks almost cute or normal, but in reality it is an extremely effective biological mechanism. When they fluff up their feathers, birds create many small layers of trapped air around their bodies. Those air layers act like an insulating jacket, slowing the rate at which heat escapes to the outside environment. What is astonishing is that a bird's feathers are not only used for flight, they are also one of the most effective heat retention systems in nature. A small bird can change the arrangement of each feather layer to adjust the amount of heat loss almost continuously throughout the night. Many bird species also tuck one leg up into their belly while sleeping to reduce the surface area exposed to cold air. Bird legs have almost no thick feather protection, so this is where heat escapes most easily. By hiding one leg into the warmer belly feathers, they significantly reduce heat loss. Sometimes if you look at a bird sleeping on a branch in winter, you will only see it standing on a single leg for hours. That is not because they are tired. It is a survival heat calculation. On windy nights or during snowstorms, birds often turn their backs to the wind to reduce the body surface area directly exposed to the cold airflow. Some species press their bodies tightly against tree trunks or large branches to avoid direct wind. Dense bushes and small tree cavities also become extremely important because they help prevent body heat from being carried away by the wind too quickly. Simply reducing the wind speed around the body a little can create the difference between life and death on extremely cold nights. What makes all of this so amazing is that most of those tiny creatures must endure such conditions almost every night throughout the winter. When dawn arrives, many birds wake up in a state of nearly complete energy depletion. The entire layer of fat accumulated the previous day has almost been burned just to maintain body temperature through a few hours of darkness. That means as soon as the first light appears, they must immediately start foraging again. Not because they are hungry in the way humans feel it, but because their bodies are truly at the edge of survival. Just a few extra hours of unusual cold during the night, or a previous day of inefficient foraging, and dozens of small birds can die at once. Sudden cold snaps often cause mass die-offs in many small bird species, simply because their bodies no longer have enough energy to continue generating heat. This makes every winter night for birds like an extremely precise thermodynamics problem. The body must retain just enough heat for organs to function, but must not consume energy faster than it can be replenished during the day. Even a small deviation in that equation can mean the end. And perhaps this is what makes the small birds in the backyard more astonishing than any of their gentle appearances. Humans see tiny creatures perching on snow-covered branches and often think they are fragile. But in reality, they are doing something that very few creatures of similar size can achieve. A body smaller than a human hand is sustaining life in freezing air through biological strategies refined over millions of years of evolution. A small bird can survive a harsh winter night thanks only to a few grams of fat, a few layers of insulating feathers, and a precisely chosen shelter spot. That is almost a miracle of biology and physics combined. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at a winter garden the same way again. Because now you know that in those dark bushes out there are tiny creatures experiencing astonishingly harsh conditions just to keep their hearts continuing to beat until the sun rises. One of the greatest mysteries of the natural world is how birds always find their way in the darkness, as if they are seeing something that humans cannot perceive at all. When a flock of small birds takes off in the middle of the night and flies thousands of kilometers across forests, seas, and mountains, the human brain almost automatically assumes there must be some kind of positioning system similar to a map or navigation technology. But birds do not possess anything like that in the way we understand. They have no satellites, no artificial compasses, no signal lights in the sky. And what makes everything even stranger is that many migrations still occur accurately, even when the sky is full of clouds and the stars completely disappear from view. This has led scientists to suspect for decades that birds are using a completely different form of orientation system from ordinary human intuition. One of the most astonishing hypotheses today is that many bird species can truly sense the Earth's magnetic field like an invisible map spread around the planet. That sounds almost supernatural until a series of experiments began to show that this may be real. In many studies, when scientists changed the artificial magnetic field around migrating birds, their flight direction also changed accordingly. Birds that always chose the correct direction suddenly became confused when the surrounding magnetic field was altered. This shows that their brains are truly reading something that humans cannot perceive at all with normal senses. And what is even stranger is that some scientists believe birds may not only sense the magnetic field, but may even see it in some way. One hypothesis suggests that special molecules exist in a bird's eyes that react to the planet's magnetism. When light enters the eye, tiny quantum reactions inside those molecules can create signal patterns that the bird's brain interprets as orientation information. In other words, the sky for birds may not just be darkness and stars. It may contain invisible layers of signals covering the entire space that humans are completely unaware of. If that is true, then a bird's experience of seeing the world would be vastly different from everything we have ever imagined. A migrating bird at night may be flying through an invisible network of directions drawn directly onto the sky by the planet's magnetic field. This becomes even more amazing when looking at young birds. Many bird species make their first migration completely alone. No adult birds to lead the way, no one to show them where to fly. But somehow they can still leave their birthplace and find the exact wintering area thousands of kilometers away that they have never seen before. A creature that has only lived for a few months can cross mountains, oceans, and darkness on its own to reach the exact place its ancestors have reached for countless generations. That is almost unbelievable from a human perspective, because we are used to thinking that knowledge of routes must be learned. But in birds, part of the map seems to have been written into their nervous system even before they take their first hop flight. And although modern science has discovered a lot about this phenomenon, the truth is that humans still do not fully understand how that system works. We know birds use the stars. We know they respond to magnetic fields. We know they recognize terrain and twilight light. But how all those signals are combined inside a bird's tiny brain remains a very big mystery. What makes this almost mystical is that the brains of many bird species are much smaller than the human brain, yet they perform orientation tasks that even modern technology once took a very long time to achieve. A creature weighing a few grams can fly across an entire continent in the darkness using only invisible signals from nature. And all of that is still happening above our heads every migration season. Try imagining the night sky from a bird's perspective instead of a human's. For us, it is just a deep black void with a few distant bright points. But for birds, the sky may be full of streams of information that human eyes cannot see, invisible magnetic directions stretching across the planet, tiny light patterns that their brains read as guidance, ancient signals that existed long before humans appeared. And perhaps that is what makes the world of birds so difficult to understand. They are living inside a different version of reality from us, a reality where space contains more information than what human senses can detect. After understanding that, it becomes hard to think that humans are seeing the entire world around them. Because now you know that right above the familiar night sky, there may exist invisible layers of signals that only the tiny creatures out there can truly perceive. When thinking about birds, most people usually imagine forests, lakes, or quiet natural areas. But in today's reality, millions of birds are living, sleeping, and adapting among concrete, glass, and the lights of enormous cities. After the sun sets, those tiny creatures begin to appear in places that humans rarely think of as natural habitats. They sleep on giant billboards, under overpasses, in the crevices of high-rise buildings, and on rows of trees located between avenues full of traffic. There are cities where tens of thousands of birds gather to sleep at the same time every night right in the urban center, while most passers-by do not notice at all. What causes this is not just because birds are forced to live near humans. Many species have truly begun to adapt to urban environments in astonishing ways. One of the biggest reasons is the heat from the city. Concrete, asphalt, and buildings retain heat long after the sun sets, making urban areas often a few degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. For small birds in winter, those few degrees can make a huge difference. A less cold night means the body has to expend less energy to stay warm. That significantly increases survival chances. Therefore, many bird species have begun to choose cities as more effective wintering places than their old natural environments. But living in the city also requires almost complete changes in behavior. Urban birds must learn to sleep amid engine noise, car horns, constant lights, and the non-stop movement of humans. Things that would panic many wild species have now become familiar background sounds for city birds. Some species have even changed their sleeping and activity hours to adapt to artificial light that lasts all night. Many birds in cities wake up earlier, go to sleep later, and stay active much longer than their wild ancestors. That means their biological clocks are gradually changing according to the rhythm of human life. What is even stranger is that some bird species actually prefer to sleep near humans. It may sound absurd, but many urban areas have fewer dangerous natural predators, like large owls, foxes, or other wild animals. The light, noise, and constant activity of humans unintentionally create a kind of biological shield that keeps many predators away. Therefore, for some small bird species, sleeping near the city is sometimes safer than sleeping in completely dark wilderness. This is an almost strange paradox of the modern world. The artificial structures built by humans to serve themselves are now becoming new survival environments for countless other creatures. If you look closely at the large rows of trees in a city at dusk, sometimes you will see hundreds or thousands of birds gathering in one place. During the day, those trees look completely normal. But when it gets dark, they turn into night cities for birds. Calls, wing flaps, and continuous movement occur inside the dark foliage while pedestrians hardly notice. Each branch becomes a perch for dozens of tiny creatures, seeking heat, safety, and collective protection in the enormous urban environment. And because artificial light means the city is never truly completely dark, the behavior of urban birds is becoming increasingly different from their wild ancestors. Some species begin foraging much later than normal. Some change their sound communication style to overcome traffic noise. There are species that even sing at higher frequencies, just so their calls are not drowned out by city sounds. This means birds and humans are no longer simply living beside each other. They are together creating a completely new form of ecosystem that natural history has never had before. A world where trees grow among concrete, where lights replace moonlight, and where wild creatures must adapt to the rhythm of human civilization in order to continue existing. What makes all of this strange is that most humans still see the city as a place separate from nature. We think of concrete, glass, and electricity. But if you look more closely at night, you will begin to realize that the city is also a vibrant biological environment full of creatures quietly adapting every day. Above the lighted streets are flocks of birds sleeping on urban branches. Under overpasses are tiny bodies huddling to retain heat. On rooftops are pairs of eyes still open to watch the darkness amid distant engine sounds. A city at midnight is not just a place where humans live. It is also a giant ecosystem operating in parallel with us in ways that most people have never truly seen. The most dangerous nights for birds are usually when humans are sitting safely inside warm houses and hardly thinking about the world outside the window. When a whipstorm approaches, most of us just hear the wind outside, close the door, turn on the heater, and wait until morning. But for millions of small birds out there, a night like that can become the harshest survival battle of the entire year. Strong winds, cold rain, and sudden temperature drops create an almost cruel combination for a bird's tiny body. They must not only retain heat in freezing air, but do so while the wind continuously pulls warmth away from their protective feathers. What makes everything more dangerous is that bird feathers are not completely waterproof as many people think. The plumage has some water resistance, but when exposed to prolonged heavy rain or wet snow soaking deep, the insulating air layer between the feather fibers begins to disappear. A wet bird in a winter night can lose heat dangerously fast in a very short time. Therefore, when a storm arrives, the roosting position becomes an extremely important survival decision. Many bird species will abandon the high branches they usually use for sleeping under normal conditions. Instead, they move down low near large tree trunks, tuck deep into dense bushes, or press tightly into the most windproof spots they can find. Tree trunks act as natural wind barriers, helping reduce the amount of heat pulled away from the body. Small tree cavities and thick ivy bushes become more valuable shelters than any comfortable perch. What is astonishing is that many bird species seem to sense the storm before it actually arrives. Just a few hours before the weather changes, their behavior begins to change noticeably. Many flocks suddenly change their usual sleeping spots and move to more sheltered areas. Some species start eating more than normal, as if their bodies know they will need more energy to survive the coming night. Scientists believe birds can sense changes in atmospheric pressure and very small fluctuations in the environment before humans notice the storm approaching. That is almost like an ancient biological warning system evolved over millions of years of living in harsh nature. Before major storms, many small birds will eat continuously for hours to build up a thicker than normal fat reserve. For them, that energy is like the final fuel before entering a battle that lasts all night. Because in extreme weather, the rate of heat loss increases dramatically. The body is forced to burn energy faster to keep organs functioning. If reserves are insufficient, birds can die from the cold, even if temperatures have not dropped to freezing. Major storms sometimes cause biological disasters on a massive scale that most humans have never seen. A prolonged strong wind during migration season can kill thousands of birds in just one night. Flocks flying above the sea or areas without shelter can be blown hundreds of kilometers off their migration route. Some become exhausted in midair. Some fall into cold water. Some simply no longer have enough energy to continue flying. What makes the surviving birds so amazing is that they achieve this with almost extraordinary biological precision. Imagine a small bird huddling in a bush during a cold wind that lasts all night. Its feathers fluffed up to the maximum to retain every thin layer of air around its body. One leg tucked tightly against its belly to reduce heat loss. Head bowed into the shoulder feathers. Its heart continues beating fast to generate heat, while energy reserves gradually decrease hour by hour. The wind keeps shaking the branches above. The temperature continues to drop. That entire tiny body is fighting against the physics of the surrounding environment just to maintain a few extra degrees of heat sufficient for life to exist until the sun rises. And perhaps the strangest thing is that the next morning, if that bird survives, it will appear again on the branch as if nothing special had just happened. Humans see an ordinary bird foraging in the early sun without knowing that a few hours earlier it had just gone through a night that could have killed it at any moment. The deeper we understand the world of birds, the more humans realize that most of their lives are actually a series of small survival victories repeated every day. A morning with birds singing outside the window is not simply a beautiful scene of nature. It is a sign that millions of tiny creatures out there have just survived one more cold night, one more strong wind, and one more harsh test of the natural world. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at the birds in the backyard the same way again, because now you know that every time they reappear after a stormy night is not something obvious. It is truly a victory of life over conditions that most small creatures can hardly endure. Most humans have never realized that the nighttime garden is actually full of sound, not because the world outside is quiet, but because our brains and senses are too limited to hear most of what is happening. When standing at the window at midnight, we often only hear the distant wind, or sometimes a few soft rustling leaves, and conclude that nature has sunk into silence. But for birds, the nighttime garden has almost never truly been silent. It is full of tiny sound signals continuously transmitted through the darkness like an invisible communication network. Many bird species produce extremely short and very quiet calls just to stay in contact with each other at night. These are not clear songs like during the day, but only sound so short that humans usually overlook them completely or even fail to notice they exist. A very soft sound coming from a bush may simply mean, "I am still here." Another sound confirms that the surrounding area is still safe. In darkness, where vision becomes limited, sound becomes an important connecting thread between tiny creatures trying to survive the night. What is astonishing is that birds have the ability to distinguish sounds with precision far beyond human intuition. They not only recognize the calls of their own kind, but can also differentiate extremely quickly between harmless noises and danger signals. The wing beat of a bird of the same species sounds different from the wing beat of a hunting owl. A sound created by wind is different from the rustling of leaves caused by something moving inside a bush. A bird's brain continuously analyzes small sound details that humans almost never notice. For them, every small vibration in the darkness can contain life or death information. This causes many nighttime sound signals to exist at a level almost invisible to human senses. A very light scratching on tree bark, a small movement of a branch above, a period of silence appearing at the wrong time. For birds, all of it has meaning. And just one small change in the environmental sound can trigger an alert response that spreads through the entire garden in a few seconds. One bird hears an unusual sound and sends a short signal. The others immediately tense their bodies in the darkness. A few pairs of eyes open. A few change perching positions. The entire biological system reacts almost simultaneously without any loud sounds. What makes this almost surreal is that most of those conversations are happening around our homes every night, while humans completely fail to understand them. Try imagining a garden at midnight from a bird's perspective. You will no longer experience a quiet space. You are standing in the middle of a sea of continuously moving sound signals. The sound of wings flapping in the night is not just random noise. It contains information about direction of movement, speed, and even the level of panic of the creature flying. An unusually strong wing beat can signal danger. A hurried wing beat in the bushes can cause dozens of other creatures to simultaneously switch to alert status. Even the distance and direction of sound reflections between tree trunks help birds determine each other's positions in the darkness. That is why the nighttime garden is actually full of survival conversations that humans never understand. Every tiny creature out there is continuously sending and receiving information through signals that our senses almost completely miss. This leads to a very strange truth about nature. Silence does not really exist. What humans call silence is often only a limitation in our own ability to perceive. Because out there, right in the darkness around your house, there is an entire world of sound still operating nonstop. There are tiny ears listening to every tiny change in the air. There are bodies reacting to signals that humans do not even know exist. There are sound exchanges taking place between the dark branches throughout the long night. And what makes this even more mysterious is that most of it will remain invisible to us unless we deliberately stop to observe very carefully. Perhaps right now, outside your window, there exist dozens of layers of biological sounds that your brain automatically ignores because it thinks the night is a time of quiet. But for birds, darkness has never been an empty silence. It is an environment full of signals, warnings, and continuous communication between creatures trying to exist until dawn. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at the nighttime garden the same way again. Because now, every time you stand in front of the dark yard and hear the silence, you will know that out there is actually an entire vibrant world of sound operating around you that you had never truly listened to before. One of the saddest things about the world of birds is that not every bird that disappears from the garden at night will return the next morning. When a familiar bird no longer appears at the feeder or on the branch outside the window, most people rarely think much about it. We often assume it just flew somewhere else or changed its feeding location. But in nature, many disappearances are actually permanent. Every night, millions of birds die from cold, hunger, collisions, exhaustion, or predation. It is just that most of those deaths happen so quietly that humans do not notice. A small bird may not survive a cold snap that lasts until near dawn. Another collides with a window in the darkness and falls into a bush where no one sees it. A migrating bird becomes exhausted midway through its journey and can never continue flying. A cat quietly carries away the bird's body before sunrise. Nature rarely leaves long-lasting traces of death. That is why most humans almost never see bird carcasses, even though billions of birds live around them every day. In the natural world, everything is reabsorbed very quickly. A dead bird is usually quickly broken down by scavengers, insects, or microorganisms. In a short time, almost all traces of that existence disappear from the surrounding environment. This makes nature operate like an almost perfect recycling system. Not much is wasted. There are not many gaps that exist for too long. One creature disappears, and the energy from its body immediately becomes part of another living system. But for humans, that creates a very strange feeling. A familiar bird may appear in your garden for many months. You see it every morning without even truly realizing you have started getting used to its presence. Then one day it does not return. No explanation, no trace, no final sound signaling what happened. There is simply an empty space where a living creature once was. And most of the time, you will never know how its end occurred. This makes the natural world very different from the sense of peace that humans often assign to the garden around the house. We see the morning sunlight, hear birds singing, and think that nature operates gently. But beneath that appearance is a much harsher reality. Life in nature is always more fragile than its outward look. A wind colder than normal, a moment of slow reaction to a predator, a migration journey that encounters the wrong wind direction. Sometimes that alone is enough to make a tiny creature never return again. What makes this even sadder is that most bird species still continue their journeys despite the very high rate of loss. Every spring, millions of birds return again from migrations thousands of kilometers long, but not all of them make it. There are young birds leaving the nest for the first time who never complete their first journey. There are creatures that have flown across half the planet for many years but then disappear in a single storm. There are spring songs that will never ring out again in the same garden. And what is strange is that nature continues to operate as if nothing happened. Other birds still sing in the morning. Other migration flocks still fly across the night sky. The following springs still arrive. That is probably one of the most beautiful yet saddest things about the natural world. Life continues uninterrupted, but each individual within it is so fragile that it can disappear almost without leaving any trace. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at small birds in the backyard as ordinary details of the landscape anymore. Because now you know that every tiny creature perching on the branch out there has actually survived countless cold nights, countless predators, and countless dangers just to appear one more time before human eyes. A morning with birds singing outside the window is no longer something obvious. It is proof that a tiny creature has just won one more time in the silent struggle for survival that most of us have never truly seen. Perhaps, after all of this, the biggest question is no longer where the birds go at night. The real question is why humans see so little of the world existing around them. Most people walk past nature every day without truly observing it. We look at the garden as a familiar scene, look at birds as a quiet background part of everyday life, and then assume we understand them. But the truth is that most of nature's activity always occurs outside the direct perception of humans. Not because nature tries to hide itself, but because our senses and attention are too limited to recognize the level of complexity existing right before our eyes. A garden that looks quiet actually contains extremely sophisticated survival behaviors. In the dark bushes are tiny bodies huddling to retain heat so they do not freeze before dawn. On the branches are creatures sleeping with half their brains still awake to monitor the surrounding darkness. Above the night sky are flocks of birds flying across continents using invisible maps that humans cannot perceive. Among the tree canopies are tiny sound signals continuously exchanged that human ears almost cannot hear. And all of that still happens every night, even though most of us have never truly paid attention. What is strange is that humans usually only see the most easily observable part of nature. We see birds singing in the morning, see them flying across the grass, or perching at the feeder under daytime sunlight. But that is only a very small slice of their real lives. Night is when many biological systems begin operating at their strongest. Enormous migrations take place in the darkness. Silent hunts begin. Heat retention, alertness, and survival strategies operate continuously until dawn. The natural world has never truly rested. It is just that humans usually stop observing when the sun sets. This leads to a rather strange realization about ourselves. What humans call reality is actually only the very small part that our brains and senses are capable of perceiving. We see the world with eyes evolved for daytime, hear with ears sensitive only to a certain range of sounds, and pay attention to things directly related to human survival. But beyond those limits, nature continues to exist with countless layers of information that we almost never notice. Birds can sense the planet's magnetic field. They hear extremely small sound signals in the dark. They navigate using systems that modern science still does not fully understand. This means that in the same garden and the same night sky, birds and humans are actually living in two very different versions of reality. And perhaps that creates the strangest feeling when beginning to understand the natural world more deeply. You realize there is an enormous layer of existence always around you that you had never truly seen before. A familiar bush in the yard is no longer just a bush. It may be a life or death shelter for dozens of tiny creatures. A dark patch of sky above the roof is no longer just silent, empty space. It may be full of migrating flocks flying across continents in the darkness. A quiet garden at night is no longer a place where nature sleeps soundly. It is a vibrant biological network full of alertness, signals, and silent movement. And what makes all of this even more beautiful is that science does not make that mystery disappear. On the contrary, the deeper we explore, the larger and more unbelievable nature becomes. Every time humans understand more about birds, we discover that they are even stranger than we previously imagined. Those tiny creatures that seem so familiar turn out to be doing things that are almost beyond ordinary human intuition. Perhaps that is the real value of science. Not to make the world simpler, but to make us realize that reality is far deeper and more complex than our initial perception. After understanding all of this, it becomes hard to look at the garden around the house the same way again, because now you know that even the most familiar place can contain astonishing secrets you had never noticed. An invisible world has always existed right around us. It is just that most of the time, humans have never truly stopped long enough to see it. The deeper we understand birds, the more humans are forced to acknowledge that the tiny creatures around us are far more extraordinary than their appearance suggests. A small bird perching on a fence looks so simple and familiar that we rarely stop to think about what that body is actually capable of. But if you look more closely, you will begin to realize that many of a bird's abilities still far exceed what human technology can fully replicate. A creature weighing only a few grams can navigate across continents in the darkness using the planet's magnetic field. It can adjust its body temperature in conditions that would kill many other animals. It can optimize energy with almost perfect precision, flying thousands of kilometers, using only a tiny amount of biological fuel accumulated in its body. And all of that is happening inside a brain much smaller than what humans usually think is necessary for such complex tasks. What makes this so amazing is that birds do not achieve these things through technological consciousness or reasoning in the way humans understand. They do it because every detail in their bodies has been refined through millions of years of extremely harsh evolution. Every feather, every muscle movement, every reflex, and every behavior is the result of countless generations where only the most efficient individuals survived long enough to pass on their traits. When a small bird tucks one leg into its belly on a cold night, that is not just a random action. It is heat physics optimized by evolution. When a flock of birds changes direction in the middle of the night to take advantage of a favorable wind, that is a form of energy optimization that humans must use extremely complex technology to simulate. When a young bird leaves the nest for the first time, but still finds the correct migration route thousands of kilometers long, its tiny brain is performing an orientation task that humans once took centuries of science to begin understanding. What is strange is that most of that complexity happens completely silently outside human attention. We see birds every day, so our brains automatically view them as normal. But the more closely you observe, the more you realize there is almost nothing normal about them. A tiny chickadee appearing at the feeder in the morning may have just survived a cold night, with temperatures low enough to freeze many other animals. It may have just slept, with half its brain still awake for alertness. It may have just consumed nearly all its energy reserves just to keep its heart beating until dawn. And then the next morning, it continues flying, foraging, and existing as if nothing special happened. When you truly think about that, the feeling is no longer just cuteness, but admiration. Because behind that tiny body is a biological system sophisticated to an astonishing degree. Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful things about nature. The most extraordinary things are often hidden inside the most familiar creatures. Humans often think they must look at giant animals or extreme natural phenomena to see the wonder of evolution. But actually, one of the most amazing parts of life is happening right in the small garden around the house every day. A small bird on a branch is the result of millions of years of continuous biological experimentation by nature. Every individual alive today is a descendant of countless generations that survived snowstorms, predation, hunger, cold, migration, and the planet's harsh changes over a time span almost unimaginable. And all of that evolutionary history now exists inside a body lighter than the palm of a human hand. What makes this even more amazing is that birds do all of it almost in complete silence. No one notices a bird that just completed a migration thousands of kilometers long. No one sees the survival battle happening every night in the dark bushes. No one pays attention to the biological calculations occurring in every small movement. But everything is still there, continuous, precise, and efficient, to the point that it sometimes sounds more like machinery than living creatures. And perhaps that is why the more we understand birds, the harder it is for humans to keep their old way of looking at them. They are no longer just small creatures flying around the backyard. They are living systems evolved with a level of sophistication that even modern technologies sometimes still cannot fully copy. After understanding that, it becomes hard to look at a small bird without feeling a completely new respect. Because now you know that behind those light wings and familiar songs is one of the most astonishing achievements that evolution has ever created on this planet. Let us return to the most familiar moment in the garden after the sun sets. The branches stand still in the darkness. The feeder is empty. The daytime songs disappear. Everything looks as if life has just completely left this place. But now you know that silence has never been absence. It is only concealment. While humans see a garden that is sleeping, in reality behind that darkness is an entirely different world continuing to operate. In the dense bushes are tiny bodies huddling to retain heat so they can exist until dawn. In the dark tree cavities are birds sleeping with half their brains still awake to listen to every movement around them. Above the night sky are flocks of migrating birds crossing entire continents using invisible maps that human eyes cannot see. And amid all of that are countless sound signals, warnings, and survival responses continuously taking place that humans almost do not notice. What is strange is that the entire nighttime garden actually operates more like a giant biological system than a quiet space. Every branch can be a shelter for life. Every bush can contain creatures fighting the cold and predators. Every dark patch of sky above can be full of migrations thousands of kilometers long. All of it is still operating, even though most humans have never truly seen it. Perhaps this is the most amazing thing about nature. The strangest things often happen precisely when humans stop observing. When we draw the curtains and think the world out there has fallen asleep, nature simply shifts to its more secret part. This also forces humans to face a rather strange truth about themselves. What we call the world is actually only the very small part that our senses allow us to perceive. Human eyes were made to see in daytime light. Human ears only hear a small part of the sound spectrum existing around us. The human brain continuously ignores countless signals to focus on what is necessary for human survival. But beyond that layer of perception, nature continues to operate with a level of complexity far beyond ordinary intuition. And when we begin to understand that, the feeling is almost like discovering another layer of reality that has always existed around us. A familiar garden suddenly becomes unfamiliar in a very beautiful way. You begin to realize that behind the motionless branches is an entire invisible biological network. Tiny creatures are continuously monitoring, retaining heat, communicating, and surviving in the darkness. Magnetic navigation systems are operating above the sky. Migrations are taking place outside human sight. Hunts, warning signals, and sophisticated survival strategies continue throughout the long night. And what makes all of this even more wondrous is that the deeper we explore, nature does not become simpler. It becomes far more complex, profound, and mysterious. Every answer science finds about birds seems to open up even bigger questions about how life truly operates on this planet. Perhaps that is why the natural world has never lost its sense of wonder. Not because humans have not explored enough, but because the more we explore, the more we realize we are standing before something much larger than our initial ability to perceive. Every night, millions of creatures are still living lives completely outside our sight. Small birds are surviving snowstorms in dark bushes. Migration flocks are flying across continents by starlight. Tiny eyes remain open in the darkness to stay alert for predators. Tiny sound signals continue spreading through the garden that no one hears. And all of that continues to happen whether humans pay attention or not. After understanding this, it becomes hard to look at the nighttime garden the same way again, because now you know that behind that familiar quietness is actually an entire vibrant, complex, and almost invisible world that has always existed around us. Let us return one last time to the image of the quiet garden under the dim light after the final songs have disappeared from the air. The branches stand motionless in the darkness. The feeder is empty. The grass no longer moves. Throughout most of their lives, humans often view that moment as a sign that life has departed. We are used to thinking that when night falls and the garden becomes silent, nature also sinks into a state of complete peaceful sleep. But now you know the truth is completely different. The birds have never truly disappeared. They have simply stepped into the part of life that human eyes rarely see. In the dense bushes out there, the cardinals are still sleeping, with their feathers fluffed up to retain heat. In the dark tree cavities, the chickadees are huddling to save every last bit of remaining energy until dawn. On the high branches are tiny eyes still partially open to listen to every movement in the darkness. And above your roof, beyond human sight, flocks of migrating birds are still flying through the night every evening along ancient routes stretching across the entire planet. The strangest thing is that all of this continues to happen whether humans pay attention or not. The natural world has never stopped operating when we turn away. It continues to function continuously, precisely, and complexly in ways that most humans have only begun to understand a very small part of. Perhaps this is the most important thing that the birds in the garden truly reveal about the world around us. Most of the beauty of nature always lies outside the direct perception of humans. What we see is only the thinnest surface layer of a giant biological system operating silently behind it. A small garden around the house is actually connected to continent-crossing migrations, to the planet's magnetic field, to seasonal cycles, and to survival mechanisms that have been refined through millions of years of evolution. What makes all of this even more wondrous is that science does not make that mystery disappear. On the contrary, the deeper we understand birds, the larger and more unbelievable the world becomes. A tiny bird turns out to be able to navigate using invisible signals that humans cannot perceive. A body lighter than a hand can survive winter nights harsh enough to kill many other creatures. A flock of birds can fly across an entire continent in the darkness using only starlight and the Earth's magnetic field. And all of those nearly extraordinary things are still happening around us every day, in creatures that humans often consider the most ordinary. Perhaps the strangest feeling appears when you realize that the familiar garden around the house has never been just a small, quiet yard. It is part of a giant planetary biological network operating continuously from the ground up to the night sky above your head. The birds appearing at the feeder in the morning are not just cute little creatures. They are travelers, survival experts, and living achievements of evolution that have existed through countless winters, storms, and journeys longer than human imagination. And perhaps from now on, every time the garden becomes silent after dusk, you will no longer look at it the same way. You will know that in the dark bushes there are still tiny hearts beating. In the tree cavities, there are still bodies huddling to retain heat. Above the night sky, there are still wings continuing to fly through the darkness. Life is still present everywhere around us, even when human eyes can no longer see it. Perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about nature. It is always far larger, deeper, and more mysterious than what humans can see with the naked eye. If you enjoy these journeys exploring the mysteries of nature and want to continue seeing the world in a completely new way, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next strange and astonishing science stories. Thank you for accompanying me tonight, and the next time the garden outside your window becomes silent after dusk, perhaps you will know that life is still quietly present everywhere around you.